7 years old, and he is already gone. Pulled from his mother at dawn, marched into a column of strangers, he will not sleep under his own roof again for 13 years. One coarse cloak, one for the entire year. No sandals, no mattress, no second meal. The Spartans called this the agoge, the upbringing, and it ran without interruption for centuries. What strikes you, looking at this system clearly, is not the harshness, it is the precision. Every deprivation was calibrated, the cold that never quite kills, the hunger that never quite breaks, the shame that cuts deeper than either. This was not cruelty for its own sake. It was engineering, and what it was engineering toward was the removal of something the Spartans considered more dangerous than any enemy spear, a man's own fear. They cut their own sleeping mats from the reeds of the river Eurotas with bare hands, because reeds offered no warmth. And that was the point. They were fed enough to survive, and not enough to be comfortable. Plutarch records in his Life of Lycurgus that boys were encouraged to steal food to supplement their rations, and that if caught, they were beaten, not for stealing, but for getting caught. The lesson was competence under pressure. Each time a boy endured hunger and still functioned, the link between discomfort and incapacity weakened. The cold worked the same way. Bare feet on frozen ground every morning until the ground no longer registered as a threat, only as ground. But these physical ordeals were only the first layer, and the next layer was something older and darker. And most accounts of Sparta never stop to describe it fully. Sometime in late adolescence, the precise age is debated by historians, the most promising youths were selected for the krypteia. They were sent alone into the Laconian countryside with nothing but a knife, ordered to move only at night, to feed themselves from the land, to return after months, no unit, no warmth, no one to confirm they were brave, just a young man in the dark, stripped of every social scaffold that normally holds courage in place. The phalanx is loud, close, and shared, men shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same air. The krypteia was the opposite, silence, solitude, and the knowledge that if something went wrong, no one was coming. It was isolation as a final examination, because in battle there would always be a moment when a man stood alone inside the noise, and what he did in that moment would come from somewhere deeper than any formation could reach. The krypteia was the Spartans reaching down to that depth and hardening what they found there. The phalanx was not a formation of fearless men. It was a machine designed so that individual fear became structurally irrelevant. Each hoplite stood with his shield on his left arm, and that shield covered not his own left side, but the unshielded right side of the man beside him. The formation only held if every man held. One step backward, one shield dropped, and the gap that opened could collapse the entire line. The Spartans understood this as a design problem, and they solved it by making cowardice not merely shameful, but mechanically lethal to the men who trusted you. The famous instruction, "Come back with your shield or on it," was recorded by Plutarch as a Spartan mother's words, and historians treat it as a genuine expression of cultural expectation, not mythology. To drop the shield was to abandon the man beside you, and in Sparta, that man was someone you had slept beside, trained beside, and starved beside since the age of 7. The agoge had not just conditioned the body, it had built a belonging so absolute that betraying it was psychologically unthinkable. A man who retreated without cause could lose his citizen status, be barred from public life, be refused in marriage. The fear of that was cultivated deliberately, made larger in their minds than the fear of the spear. Fear was not eliminated, it was redirected, aimed inward at cowardice rather than outward at the enemy. That is the mechanism all those years of hunger and cold were actually assembling. Not the removal of fear as a feeling, but its replacement by a force stronger than fear. The refusal to be the man who breaks the line. Ancient Spartan society wielded public shame as a weapon as deliberately as it wielded hunger. And the shame was engineered to cut in exactly the right direction. This is the reframe the entire system was building toward. Fear is not your enemy when it is pointed at the right thing. And it points directly to the one question worth sitting with now. What does this mean for a man living today with no agoge, no phalanx, and fears that are quieter but no less real? The Spartans left no philosophical treatise, no written curriculum. What they left was a result. Men who, at Thermopylae, were observed by ancient sources, Herodotus among them, to be combing their hair and exercising calmly on the morning of what they knew would be their last battle, not performing indifference, expressing it, because decades of controlled exposure had rewired what their bodies registered as an emergency. The science behind this is now well documented. Repeated voluntary exposure to a stressor at a level that challenges but does not overwhelm progressively reduces the threat response to that stressor. The Spartans built an entire civilization around this principle without naming it. You're watching Neostoa, and it transfers. Not through imitation. No one is recommending 13 years of institutionalized hardship. But through the principle beneath the method, fear does not shrink by being avoided. It grows in the avoidance. It shrinks only in the doing. The cold shower you keep postponing is not about cold. It is about training the part of you that hesitates at the threshold, that waits for readiness before it moves. Readiness is not a feeling. It is a habit built by doing the hard thing before you feel ready, then doing it again until the threshold simply lowers. One thing today, not the full weight of a life rebuilt, one deliberate exposure to something you have been avoiding. The hard conversation, the cold, the fast, the workout you canceled twice, small, voluntary, controlled. Done not because it is comfortable, but because the man who walks toward discomfort on purpose is building something the agoge built across 13 years and an entire civilization, a self that does not flinch at its own threshold. That boy who stood on the banks of the Eurotas did not begin fearless. He became it, not by birth, not by nature, but by returning again and again to the thing that frightened him until it no longer could. That is the agoge translated. That is what they were actually doing. That's the story. Follow Neostoa for more.